Why would a woman who spent her entire career warning America about the dangers of Islam suddenly whisper the Shahada through tears in a Manhattan mosque? Why would a war veteran who blamed Muslims for every nightmare he endured in the battlefield break down in front of a former enemy and say, "I'm ready"? What happens when the very people who hated Islam most become its defenders? This isn't a video about religion. It's a story about truth, about inner conflict, and about the mysterious ways light finds its way into even the darkest corners. Two people, Emily, a top New York journalist, and Jake, a battle-hardened ex-soldier from Montana, are about to take you on a journey of doubt, anger, discovery, and transformation. Their stories are real, and their questions might be yours too. In the heart of New York City, where skyscrapers scrape the clouds and media studios churn out headlines by the minute, Emily Reynolds carved her name as one of the most vocal critics of Islam. She grew up watching images of veiled women beside news stories of bombings. The equation in her mind was clear. Islam equals violence. As a journalist, she didn't question it. She amplified it. Her editorials were fiery, her social media presence viral, and her inbox overflowing with praise from those who saw her as a patriotic voice against a growing threat. Across the country, in the vast, quiet plains of Montana, Jake Harrison lived a different life but held the same hate. A Marine turned recluse, Jake had seen too much in his deployment to the Middle East. Night after night, visions of dust, fire and blood haunted him. He lost friends, he saw children die, and in his grief he found an enemy to blame: Islam. To Jake, Islam wasn't just a religion, it was the face of the pain that never left him. And yet, something unexpected was stirring. In a world shaped by division and headlines, two Americans, Emily Reynolds and Jake Harrison, found their beliefs beginning to fracture under the quiet weight of truth. For Emily, it started with an assignment she never asked for: an investigative piece on the Muslim community in Brooklyn. She approached it with the same cynicism that had defined her career, expecting to find hidden radicalism beneath polite smiles. But what she found instead were families who opened their doors to her, children who recited the Quran with reverence and joy, women who wore the hijab not out of oppression, but out of devotion. Her interviews contradicted everything she had believed. She met a mother who lost her son to gang violence, not terrorism, a teenager who spent his weekends feeding the homeless, an imam who cried while reading verses about mercy. The stories didn't match the narrative she had built her career on, and that dissonance began to shake her. Emily found herself returning to the mosque, not as a journalist, but as a seeker, quiet, humbled, and curious. Meanwhile, in the windswept silence of Montana, Jake Harrison spent his nights watching war documentaries, trying to make sense of his pain. But one evening, a video caught his eye, not of war, but of peace. It was a clip of a former soldier like him, who had found solace in Islam. The man spoke not in slogans or ideology, but in raw, broken sentences about healing, about forgiveness, about finally sleeping through the night. Jake scoffed at first, then he watched it again and again. Eventually he reached out, sending an email he never thought he'd write. The response came quickly, an invitation to meet, to talk, no pressure. That meeting turned into a coffee, then a conversation about the Quran, then a night where Jake broke down in tears as he read Surah al-Baqarah's verses on patience and divine justice. The anger he had carried for years was not erased, but it was confronted. And slowly, in the quiet of his home, Jake began to pray. Two people on opposite ends of the country, with histories soaked in hate, were now being drawn to a faith they once despised. Not through force, not through propaganda, but through the simple, undeniable power of truth, kindness, and lived example. Their transformation had begun, not as a spectacle, but as a whisper that would one day echo loudly. Would you like me to continue their story from here? Emily's journey began not with curiosity, but with confusion. While researching for another scathing article, she stumbled upon a video titled, "Why I Left Christianity for Islam, a Harvard Professor's Story." It was clickbait, she thought. But as she watched, something didn't add up. The professor wasn't emotional, he wasn't lost, he wasn't radical, he was calm, rational, at peace. Days later, she found herself on a YouTube spiral, a former Catholic nun who converted, an ex-gang member who found purpose through prayer, a physicist who found mathematical precision in the Quran. Each video cracked a piece of her assumptions, until one night she downloaded the Quran in English. The first words hit her like a whisper in the storm. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. In Montana, Jake's battle was more physical. At the Veterans Rehab Center, a young volunteer named Omar caught his attention. Not in a good way. Jake hated him instantly. A Muslim, bearded, smiling. Jake hurled sarcasm at him every chance he got. But Omar never flinched. He responded with respect, patience, even when Jake was at his worst. Then one day, during a panic attack, it was Omar who helped Jake breathe again. He didn't ask for thanks, just said, "Our messenger taught us to repay evil with good." Jake didn't sleep that night. In New York, Emily arranged a meeting with a Muslim professor she had once mocked in print. She came prepared for debate, but the man didn't argue. He listened. Then he said, "Hate us if you must, but don't judge us before you understand us." In Montana, Jake asked Omar, "If Islam is peace, why are there terrorists?" Omar asked him back, "Do all soldiers always represent American values?" That hit home. Both Emily and Jake were now on the edge of something they couldn't define. Truth, perhaps, or collapse. Their private searches became daily rituals. Quiet reads, long walks, endless questions. Every answer peeled back another layer. Emily went to an iftar at a mosque disguised as a reporter. But what she saw was far from the extremist gatherings she imagined. Children laughed. Strangers welcomed her. A hijabi offered her a seat and warm tea. Jake read Surah Al-Ikhlas. Say, He is Allah the one and only, Allah the eternal, absolute. He begets not, nor is he begotten, and there is none like unto him. He didn't understand why, but it made him cry. For Emily, the transformation wasn't dramatic. It was gradual, like the slow turning of a tide. The more she read, the more she saw that Islam was not the caricature she had painted. It wasn't fire and fury. It was structure, discipline, and immense spiritual depth. Verses about justice, mercy, charity, and self-restraint replaced the headlines she had once weaponized. Her heart battled her ego. Could she admit she'd been wrong all these years? That she had helped fuel hatred under the banner of journalism? Her articles grew quieter. Her social media, once filled with venom, became silent. She didn't know how to explain it, even to herself. One day, she walked past a bookstore and saw a small flyer taped to the glass. Introduction to Islam. Free class. All welcome. Her hand trembled as she tore it down and put it in her bag. She would go. Meanwhile, Jake's anger had started to dissolve into curiosity, though he still fought it. He began joining Omar for walks after therapy, asking blunt, unfiltered questions. Why do women cover their heads? What do Muslims think happens after death? Do you hate America? Omar never flinched, never reacted in anger. He just answered. And Jake found himself listening, really listening. They discussed war, forgiveness, and faith. Jake, who hadn't stepped into a church in years, found himself oddly comforted by the call to prayer Omar played from his phone. It was haunting, beautiful, grounding. He downloaded it too. At night, instead of whiskey, Jake began drinking tea. He prayed, not because he was sure of God, but because he was desperate for peace. In one of their conversations, Omar gave him a small English translation of the Quran and said, "No pressure, just read it like you'd read a letter from someone who loves you, but whom you've ignored for a long time." Emily finally sat in that classroom a week later, surrounded by people just as unsure as she was. The instructor didn't preach, he explained, about Tawheed, about the prophets, about the beauty of prayer, and for the first time she felt no pressure to prove or perform, just learn, just feel. She left the class crying, overwhelmed by a strange combination of guilt, awe, and hope. That night, she prayed for the first time in her life, not to Jesus, not to the image of God she had rejected long ago, but to the one she had only just begun to discover. And in Montana, on a quiet Friday, Jake followed Omar to the masjid. He stood at the back, arms crossed, watching rows of men bow and prostrate. No one forced him to join. But when they finished, an elderly man turned to Jake, shook his hand and said, "Welcome, brother." Jake didn't know why that word hit him so hard. Brother, but it did. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged. Both Emily and Jake were changing, not because someone converted them, but because the truth found cracks in their walls. They weren't ready to declare anything yet, but something had taken root, and it was growing. Would you like me to continue with the transition to broader issues or deepen their personal journeys further? As Jake and Emily's walls cracked, they noticed something deeper. They weren't just wrong about Islam, they had been used, fed a narrative, conditioned to fear. The media sold fear like candy. The military complex justified wars. Cliques, dollars, agendas. They started seeing others too. A former pastor, a Jewish rabbi, a feminist scholar, all turning to Islam, not out of emotion, but study, reflection, honesty. What did they all see? How could a religion demonized so intensely be the choice of intellectuals, scientists, and survivors? And then came the politics. Emily looked back at her articles. She had unknowingly parroted talking points crafted by think tanks with agendas. She saw how the fear of Islam was weaponized to justify surveillance, wars, bans. Jake began to question why his unit was really sent to certain regions. Liberation missions that left civilians dead. They weren't just confronting a new faith, they were confronting an old lie. One rainy afternoon in New York, Emily stepped into a mosque. No camera, no notepad, just a racing heart. A woman smiled, no preaching, no pressure. Emily whispered, "I want to become Muslim." And with that, she said the Shahada and cried. In Montana, Jake knocked on Omar's door. He didn't speak, just looked at his friend and whispered, "I'm ready." Omar guided him. Jake said the words, and finally, felt peace. Emily and Jake didn't become saints. They still wrestle with their past. But now they walk with humility. They tell their stories, not to convert, but to correct, to heal, to show that even the most unlikely hearts can find truth. Their stories echo across America. Quiet revolutions happening behind closed doors. Converts once filled with hate, now filled with hope. And all it took was one question they dared to ask. What if I've been wrong? And with that said, thanks for watching, and until next script, Assalamu alaikum.